This week in the Pentagon, the terror threat inside Pakistan.
I'm gravely concerned about the progress they have made in the South and inside Pakistan.
Plus,
we're here at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where we're taking a look at the military's past as well as its future.
fire!
It has a digital fire control system. Basically, it has an onboard computer on the weapon system.
We're kind of evolving into a focus from electronic support into an electronic attack.
And Warrior's Journey. Legendary Native Americans who served in the U.S. Army.
Native Americans are, as an ethnic group, have more representation in the American Army than any other ethnic group per capita.
Welcome to This Week in the Pentagon. I'm Sergeant John Mann, bringing you a special episode right here from Fort Sill, Oklahoma. The U.S. Army recently started a new school here dedicated to teaching electronic warfare, and recently started a whole new branch of service dedicated to that mission.
Technology is moving forward so quickly, and the tie that binds all these is electronics.
It's an exciting new field. It gives us the ability to support our commanders.
But while electronic warfare has been part of the military ever since there was electronics, this new branch serves a brand new mission for the 21st century Army.
Ever since armies began using the electromagnetic spectrum to communicate or detect approaching aircraft, there have been others out there trying to stop them.
It goes all the way back to the First World War, and then World War II with the different integrated air defense systems that we were going up against. It encompasses anything that can utilize electromagnetic spectrum. Electronic warfare can have some type of effect on it.
This move and countermove became known as electronic warfare and has been an integral part of military operations since the beginning of the 20th century. But while the American Air Force and Navy maintained a mastery of the field, the Army, in many ways, fell behind, a fact that became all too apparent during Operation Iraqi Freedom as the Army faced its greatest threat, the remote detonated IED.
The Army has always done electronic warfare. It's just come more to the forefront now with the capabilities of our current adversaries. When OIF started, that's where we started seeing the RCIEDs, and so that took electronic warfare to a different level, and it had to be addressed.
In a quiet classroom on Fort Sill, the Army is training a new, permanent solution in the creation of a new electronic warfare career field, designated the 29 series.
We have various backgrounds of students that come through here. The way we set the course up is we give them their basic fundamentals up first, then we give them their capabilities, and then we tie it all together with the practical exercises toward the end of the courses. And so by that time, they're able to fully integrate electronic warfare operations into daily operations.
These soldiers are not training as EW users, but integrators who bridge the gap between EW assets and capabilities that already exist and the maneuver commanders on the ground.
He integrates the non-lethal and the lethal means for the commander.
The integrator that needs to understand what the maneuver commander wants on the battlefield, and then understand what the effects that he can have in the realm of electronic warfare, computer network attack, and exploitation, and have the effects that the maneuver commander wants at a particular time and a particular place.
The new Army doctrine places EW officers within the Fires and Effects Cell, which emphasizes its important role on the battlefield.
Parts of EW have effects just like fires have effects, and so it's a form of fires. We identify what it is we want to engage and what effect we want to have on it, and then through the targeting process we go ahead and get that effect for the maneuver commander when he needs it.
We're now seeing the electronic warfare as a core warfighting capability.
The soldiers volunteering for the new career field know firsthand how EW saves lives.
I think this will be key not only in the current operations that are going OIF and OEF, but also in the future operations, in that technology is moving forward so quickly, and the tie that binds all these is electronics.
While the courses here at Fort Sill are still in the pilot phase, the Army plans to add 1,600 EW personnel over the next 3 years and regained the lead in the art of electronic warfare.
And now here's a look at other news this week in the Pentagon.
In a briefing May 4th before reporters, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Admiral Michael Mullen expressed concern over Taliban advances in Pakistan.
The consequences of their success directly threaten our national interests in the region and our safety here at home. This isn't about can do anymore. This is about must do. And we must do more over at least the next 2 years, starting now.
The chairman went on to say the region remains the most challenging part of the world right now for the United States. Also this week, Defense Secretary Robert Gates traveled to Egypt and Saudi Arabia to meet with leaders there and reaffirm military-to-military relationships between those countries and the United States. The focus of discussions centered around regional security, the Mideast peace process, and Iran.
I think that there is very broad concern in the region about Iran and its activities. And our goal is to continue working with our friends in the region.
In a surprise stop along the way, Secretary Gates made an unannounced visit to Afghanistan where he met with troops. The secretary said he wanted to get a sense from the ground level how operations were going. Top defense officials say major spending priorities in the 2010 defense budget reflect the stated goal of providing U.S. troops with the resources needed to succeed. May 7th, President Barack Obama sent to Congress a defense budget of more than $663 billion.
Coming up, Warriors in Blue. Welcome back to our program. Fort Sill was established as an outpost during the Indian Wars of the mid-19th century. While that mission is long gone, the memories remain.
Native Americans are a people with a rich history and tradition dating back thousands of years. Now, a new museum dedicated to that legacy is set to open at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, called Warrior's Journey.
The story of this gallery revolves around that warrior tradition that was so strong, how it was lost after 1875, how it was regained through the military.
Tawana Spivey is the museum's curator.
Native Americans are, as an ethnic group, have more representation in the American Army than any other ethnic group per capita.
Mr. Spivey, who is a Chickasaw Indian, says what little is known about the history of Native Americans at Fort Sill is told through the museum's artifacts and displays.
When we look at this, we examine the yellow paint on the hair, the part of his hair which typically identifies him as Comanche. Now you know his nationality. Fur-wrapped braids indicate a bona fide accepted warrior. He's warrior status. The extenders that go down beyond his braids show he's a warrior of high status, a general. Beads across the chest show that he was a member of a particular warrior society.
What is today Oklahoma was formerly Indian territory. In the mid-1800s, dozens of different tribes were relocated to the state. When they arrived,
the Army's mission in the Indian Territory was to keep the white people out, keep the Indians in, and bring law and order to the territory. The star you see on the map is the location of Fort Sill. The colored circles and the destinations are the different tribes that came to this immediate area. Fort Sill was set up in the southwest part of the Indian Territory, as was referred to serve as a point of stabilization, a control factor. Keep the Texans south of Red River, the Indians north of Red River.
With the surrender of hostile tribes in the region in 1875, a different type of relationship between Native Americans and the United States Army began to develop.
The President issues an order allowing for Army officers to serve as Indian agents. This is a big deal. It's a crossover of authority and power, how these tribal people, once the enemy, now partner with the Army and are responsible for many of the good things the Army is known for.
like that of Comanche warrior Kawana Parker. He was one of the last Indian warriors to surrender to the United States. He'd eventually become a judge on the Court of Indian Offenses and a U.S. ambassador.
Was very good friends with President Teddy Roosevelt, was involved in his inauguration parade. Generals sought his counsel. He painted 16 stars on his house to show he outranked any general that ever came to visit him.
And then there were Indian scouts and legendary code talkers.
This coat is the last and only surviving example of the scout overcoat with its pointed hood. The Army regulations do not describe why the hood is pointed. It simply says uniform to be distinctive.
Mr. Spivey hopes that those who visit the exhibit learn something new about American history and the contributions made by Native Americans to the U.S. Army.
A popular legend here at Fort Sill is the famous Apache warrior Geronimo, who lived out his last remaining years living on this base. He even spent a few nights at this guardhouse prison behind me. But while he was classified as a prisoner of war, Geronimo was also a real American soldier.
The story of Geronimo is history wrapped in myth and folklore and holds a special place of honor at Fort Sill.
We always walk a tightrope with him because he's both a legend and a real character.
Geronimo rose to fame and infamy as the last Cherokee Apache to surrender to the United States Army in 1886.
There were jokes about how many officers does it take to catch an Apache. And all the magazines of the day saying Geronimo should go to West Point and teach classes.
After his surrender, Geronimo and his people were relocated to Army forts in Florida and later Alabama. But conditions in both locations were bad for the Apaches, and they were moved to Fort Sill, Oklahoma in 1894. Though still listed as prisoners of war, he was anything but.
We see big changes in a time of recovery because now the Apache warriors, hostile and friendly alike, were enlisted into the Army. Geronimo became a soldier. He was a POW. He was a soldier. He carried weapons. He wore a uniform. He was paid a salary.
Though a standing member of the United States Army, he never let anyone forget that he was still Geronimo.
He was arrogant at times, and he sometimes would get caught up in his own legends. It all goes to the legend status and how we see things, the perspective we develop today looking at the past. Another reason for this gallery, to help cut through the folklore, the legends, bring truth to the history, and we learn that the history is every bit as interesting, if not more so, than the folklore.
Coming up, it's called the King of the Battlefield. Welcome back to our program. The U.S. Army is opening a new museum dedicated to field artillery right here at Fort Sill on June 2nd, 2009. But we got a special behind-the-scenes look at the new museum. Come on, let's check it out.
This is one of the original rocket projectiles from the Mexican War here. That was the first U.S. Army rocket launcher.
It's like taking a walk back in time. Back to the battlefields of World Wars I and II, the Mexican War, and the American Revolution.
The ideal is to see the history of American artillery from the very beginning up to the present day by being able to see examples of first the artillery pieces, also the rockets and missiles that were used.
Gordon Baker is director of the soon-to-open U.S. Army Artillery Museum at Fort Sill. Long known as the home of field artillery, the post has played a significant role in most every major American military conflict.
This is the earliest piece of artillery here in the museum. This is a 1-pound breech-loading iron swivel gun. Dates to about 1500. You put powder down the barrel and then you put rocks, nails, scrap metal, whatever you've got down the barrel. and it just works like a giant shotgun. This is a American-made Revolutionary War howitzer, and howitzers were used for indirect fire, like if you were trying to shell the inside of an enemy fort. This is one of the weapons you'd want to use. In the earlier days, artillery was normally put in place at the very beginning of the battle or before the battle and never moved.
Like cannons, which brought a lot of firepower to the battlefield, earning it the nickname King of Battle. To make the cannon more mobile, some were even mounted on mules.
This is the 1-pound mule gun. It was developed during the 1880s, and it was actually intended to be fired off the back of a mule. The mule, of course, reacted with a great deal of panic, and they fired a total of 3 shots. Apparently one of the shots knocked a chimney off a house. One of the shots knocked the mule over backwards, and so that was the end of the mule gun prototype. The last American rocket launcher of World War II, it made it into action in Europe during the last month of the war. This is the M2, which is the most commonly used American artillery piece of World War II.
Other pieces from World War I include this French 75mm gun and a Holt 10-ton tractor-trailer that moved artillery around the battlefield. And then there's the M7 howitzer, nicknamed the Priest.
This is where the driver would sit on this M7 self-propelled howitzer from World War II. It was nicknamed the Priest by British soldiers because this cupola, where the M2 gunner would stand, reminded British soldiers of pulpits in English churches.
As the museum prepares to open its doors to the public June 9th, there's no doubt that all who stop by for a visit will discover something new about the evolution of artillery.
Artillery has played an important role on the battlefield long before the United States even existed. To help bring a little perspective, here's a brief history of artillery.
Artillery is almost as old as war itself. It began when ancient armies discovered it is much more preferable to throw or launch weapons at their enemies from a distance instead of closing into the messier business of hand-to-hand combat. The bow and arrow can be considered an early form of artillery, but the larger weapons that come to mind when one thinks artillery were developed mostly for use in siege warfare. One of the first such weapons was the gastrofides, or belly bow. A larger version of the weapon, called the oxybelus, was used by Alexander the Great during his campaign against the Persian Empire. The ballista used torsion springs, essentially tightly twisted ropes, to launch large arrows called bolts up to 500 yards. Though very effective against heavy infantry, they were too weak to knock down stone fortifications. This was left to onagers, what we think of as catapults, that could throw heavy projectiles hard enough to damage masonry. The greatest weakness of these weapons was their lack of mobility, which limited their effectiveness on battlefields. It was in the mostly stationary activity of siege warfare where their great power was demonstrated. During the Middle Ages, the trebuchet was the most powerful and accurate siege engine in use. It could hurl boulders accurately over 300 yards, allowing armies to consistently batter a particular fortification until it would crumble. Gunpowder was first invented in China, and early cannons were used against and later by the Mongol invaders under Genghis Khan, who brought the technology west. Massive cannons were used by the Ottoman Turks in the siege of Constantinople in 1453. These early weapons, like their stone-throwing counterparts, were slow to move and fire, and only effective against stationary targets. By the 17th century, as metallurgy improved and more powerful gunpowder was invented, artillery revolutionized warfare. Fortifications that once stood 1,000 years yielded in days to the thunder of cannon shells. As cannon became smaller and more portable, artillery took on an important role on the battlefield itself. As the nature of artillery changed, so did the face of Europe. Kings were able to use their newfound artillery superiority to force any local dukes or lords to submit to their will. This integrating effect paved the way for the emergence of nation-states with a strong central government, all thanks to the king of the battlefield.
Fire! Fort Sill, Oklahoma is home to the United States Army's and Marine Corps artillery training schools.
Hey, gunner! Get number one! Get number two! Here's post.
Here, new Marines and soldiers train on the latest evolution in artillery.
The reason the M777 is unique is because it has a digital fire control system. Basically, it has an onboard computer on the weapon system. This right here is called your Chief of Section display. It displays your fire mission data. You have the number 1 cannoneer. He actually fires the weapon system upon command from the section chief. You have the gunner located right here.
And how fast can they get a round downrange?
When we get a fire mission, you can time it.
You might give that a try here.
It's pretty quick.
Deflection 3051! Shell AG! Shell AG!
The computer system cuts the time it takes to aim the weapon, as well as reducing the chance for human error.
3161!
Quadrant 236!
Charlie T fuse time! Time 1 2.
The digital fire control also comes with some other advantages.
Ready, jump! Ready, round!
Ready number 2! 2006!
The M777 is the only towed howitzer that is capable of shooting the Excalibur round, a GPS-guided munition that circular error of probability is only 5 meters.
Fire!
The combination of the M777 and the Excalibur shell allows a single battery to cover an area of around 5,000 square kilometers, which is more than the state of Rhode Island.
Fire!
The M777 is already in use in Iraq and Afghanistan, from mule guns to atomic cannons. Fort Sill itself is a homage to the long history of artillery. And now, with the M777's improved mobility, range, and accuracy, the modern artilleryman is not about to relinquish his crown as the king of battle.
And that's our show this week. I want to thank all those involved for their contributions. Please be sure to tune in and join us again next week as we take a look at the top news stories surrounding the Department of Defense. I'm Sergeant John Mann. Thanks for watching. I want to give a special thank you and shout out to the USO at the Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport for their help for this traveling soldier. We leave you now with these images from the long history of Fort Sill, Oklahoma.
Yo,